Our very first speaker this evening is Mr. Edward Lloyd Rogers Johnson, a descendant of the Rogers family. For the last 3 years, he's been researching the previous Druid Hill owners and will share some of his family history tonight. So please be patient with him. It is his very first major lecture.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. When I was growing up in my family, we always talked about family connections. We were related to so-and-so, or related to so-and-so. But it had not much meaning to me. It didn't have any meaning to me. And there were little bits of history, but not much else. Then one day, 4 years ago, I visited the family cemetery in Druid Hill and discovered the condition, and embarked on a family history project that come up for reasons why the cemetery should be saved. Let me show you there are 2 photos of the cemetery as it is today. This is as it is right now. It's being totally overgrown with weeds. And this is a convention of some of the actual cemeteries, the graves. Anne Drady's book that she wrote on Druid Hill gives a very good basic reference source to start with, but new sources of information have become available that have allowed me to expand the amount of known history known about my family. Now, Joanne gave us some information on the history of how Druid Hill became, but I'm going to go into a little more detail. This is going to be a quick family history of how the land that in Druid Hill Constance became what it is today. Now, Nicholas Rogers I came to Maryland probably around the 1670s, and one of the first properties he purchased was now part of Fort McHenry. He died in 1693, and his only known child was Nicholas II, as you can see in the family chart up there. Now, Nicholas II made 2 major purchases of land. The first was one in 1708 that was called Parker's Haven and Kemp's Addition, which encompassed 200 acres. Now, that one I'll come back to later. In 1716, he purchased a land called Habnab at Venture, which was also around 200 acres. His daughter, Eleanor, inherited Habnab, strange name, and when Nicholas died in 1720, and she later married Dr. George Buchanan. Now, Dr. Buchanan came from Scotland in 1623 and quickly became an important member of the Baltimore community. In 1729, he was one of the founders of Baltimore City and was one of the first commissioners. George bought additional land around Habnab and built his first house there, which was probably near where the family cemetery is today, not where the mansion is, and called it Aucontroller. This became his estate, and he died in 1750 and left Aucontroller to his eldest son, Lloyd. Now, unfortunately, Lloyd only had one child, and her name was Eleanor again. And guess who ends up marrying her? His cousin Nicholas Rogers, the 4th, in 1783. And Nicholas then renamed the estate Druid Hill. Now, Nicholas left the estate to his only son, Lloyd, in 1722. And in 1860, Baltimore purchased the park from Lloyd for $500,000. Now, one of the stories I'm going to start to tell you is about Benjamin Rogers and how Benjamin Rogers' misfortune benefited Baltimore. I'm going to go off Druid Hill for the moment and tell you about some other interesting stories about the Rogers family and how they affected Baltimore history. Now, Nicholas' oldest son was William, who also became a Baltimore City Commissioner like his brother-in-law, George, and focused on purchasing land. William inherited several pieces of land, including the one I mentioned previously, Parker's Haven and Kemp's Addition, from his father. Now, when he passed away, he left this piece of land to his son, Benjamin Rogers, who was a strong supporter of the American Revolution, was involved in several committees, and a judge in Baltimore County. But he, like his father, William, who was very much believed in buying land, he ended up purchasing a large piece of land that eventually accumulated over 3,000 acres. but in 1780, his troubles began. He sent a letter to the governor saying he could not borrow any money. Then, around 1783, Baltimore went into a depression. Real estate values collapsed, and a lot of the land suddenly became worthless. He started putting up the land for sale in 1782, but he couldn't sell it. In 1786, again, he put another large piece of land up for sale. And then in 1789 was one of the most tumultuous years for Benjamin. He was first locked up for insolvency. Then he first put one of his first houses up for sale at auction. He also then put up Rogers Mill, which was located on Paper Mill Road in the Gunpowder River, up for sale. And then in 1789, the state legislature tried to rescue him. They put a rescue package together and tried to buy up all his land to help him out financially. Now, some of these events maybe sound similar to what we're going through today.
Sounds like a bailout.
So in 1790, he put his second house up for sale. And then in 1792, he finally put up the property I mentioned previously, Parker's Haven and Kemp's Addition. They were sold at auction. The purchaser, William Patterson. And that land, which was bounded by Washington Avenue, Fells Point, Orleans Avenue to the north, Haven Street near Bayview, and the harbor to the south, was what those two pieces of property encompassed. And if Benjamin had not gone through, we may not have Patterson Park today. Now, we're going to come back to Benjamin. I'm going to come back to Benjamin in a moment. Meanwhile, another of Buchanan's son, Archibald, and his wife, Sarah, inherited a property from him that was 325 acres. And he called it Belleville. Now, Archibald died in 1785, and his wife, Sarah, immediately put the land up for sale. And then it didn't sell that year, so she put it back up for sale, but under a new name, Timonium. Now, there was a whole legacy of how Timonium got its name. There were people who created this whole fallacy. It turned out to be fallacy that she had gone on a trip, and one of her friends had died when she was captured by pirates and made to walk the plank. But, of course, the timing ended up being wrong. The fallacy ended up being not true. But the other interesting thing about this is that there was an ad in 1802, again offering Timonium for sale. It shows how slow property values were difficult to sell property because it took a long time and still hadn't sold. And in the ad it says, Benjamin Rogers, who is living on the property, will show it to you. So she put Benjamin sold everything he had. She put him up as the last place he had to live. And he died in 1803 in Timonium. And Timonium finally sold in 1804. Now, what I didn't know was, I found out later, was the Archibald Buchanan house stood on Timonium Road near the railroad tracks for 200 years. And in 1977, the county allowed it to be torn down. And I used to walk by the house, and I remember realizing it was a family house. Now, the next story